India, at the beginning of the Renaissance era, was in a decline. The Mongol Empire, which controlled mainland India, was constantly under attack from its neighbors, and over the years was beginning to fall apart. Zanzu once said in The Art of War that in the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. This is the reality that Europeans would exploit in the coming centuries as they transformed India towards their own agenda. The question is, how does a region with a population greater than all of its future overlords eventually become subjugated by one power thousands of miles away? The answer to that comes with a story. The story of the British East India Company. For the longest time in recent history, India was the go-to trading partner for spices and other commodities not available domestically to Europeans. Naturally, because of this, private businesses set sail to India with the goal of achieving a monopoly over these trades. The main contenders in this race would be companies and governments from Portugal, the Netherlands, France, Spain, and England. Starting in the early 1500s, Portugal was the first nation to actually set up trading posts in India. They quickly established vast wealth and influence over the region, which made other European nations envious of the Portuguese position. Portugal would remain the sole contender in India for the entirety of the 16th century, until the Netherlands with the Dutch East India Company established their first port in the year 1600. It was also shortly before this point that Queen Elizabeth I smashed King Philip's Spanish Armada in the English Channel. Subsequently, many of the ships that were abandoned or beached by their Spanish crews were now captured by the British and sold to merchants and explorers. These ships, with their large and solid construction, allowed the English to circumnavigate the globe and shortly thereafter would begin to arrive in the Indian Ocean. But that was with mixed results. In 1600, a group of English explorers and merchants were able to obtain a charter granting them permission to head east. These men would later become the British East India Company. Initially arriving with the pretense of setting up in Singapore rather than India, the company fell under hard times as competition drew them out. However, since the English and Spanish were still by this point in conflict, the English would find greater successes raiding Spanish and Portuguese shipping vessels. In 1601, Sir James Lancaster commanded a voyage that would succeed in the capturing of a large Portuguese merchant vessel containing over 600 tons of valuable spices. Upon returning to England with the newly captured spices, the English were ecstatic with their success and granted further voyages east. After being kicked out of Singapore, the now British East India Company decided to set up camp in India. By 1608, the company established its first transit point at Surat and 2 years later built its first trading post. However, the company was not without its problems. The strictly competitive nature of the trade led to a lot of conflict in the region. In 1612, the English and Portuguese engaged in a major naval battle known as the Battle of Swalley. The English would come out victorious, granting them secure access to the seaways, as well as swaying Mongol Emperor Jehangir in English favor. This approval would be critical to the company's success, as with permission from the crown and the emperor gave room for the company to expand. Sir Thomas Roe would play a significant role in English expansion with his diplomatic mission to the Emperor in the year 1615. Relying on slave labor, the company built more and more trading posts on leased Indian land on the coast. At the time, Emperor Jehangir allowed this action as his nation was still in the decline and the English promised access to European goods not present in India. By 1647, the company had gone from 3 trading posts in the year 1613 to 23 scattered across the Indian coast, essentially building one every other year. The English were even able to purchase land in the year 1640, which would later become the city of Madras. This marked the first ever time Indian land was ever owned by the English. This in turn would generate even more profits for the company, which fueled even greater expansion. By this point, the English had mostly defeated any foreign influence in their combined regions, like at Swali, leaving the Dutch as their main competitor in the area. And how about the Dutch? Around this time, the Dutch East India Company was the largest and most profitable trading monopoly in the world, with over 50,000 employees and over 200 private merchant vessels. They were one hell of a fighting force too, responsible for displacing the Portuguese from the area, cancelling any chance for Portuguese dominance in the region. It was because of this intense competition between the Dutch and the expanding British, which caused several real-world conflicts at home between them. The Anglo-Dutch Wars of the 17th and 18th centuries were defined by this theme, but most of them proved to be indecisive. Back on the mainland, the English decided to begin governing and setting up sovereign territories where they settled. But this action pushed Indian compliance too far. In 1689, in response to aggressive company actions, a Mongol fleet, commanded by Admiral Sidi Yakub, attacked English-held Bombay and laid siege. After a year, the company had to surrender, pay reparations, and being forced to promise better behavior in the future. This was an action that the company would never forget. It's the French, and they started their own company in India. Let's rewind a bit. King Louis the Sun King was not ignorant of the successes of his neighbors in the Indian trade. In 1664, the French East India Company was created and chartered, forming its first trading post in the year 1668. But entering the game late was costly for France, as the Dutch attempted to halt every advancement from the French merchants. Like the Dutch and English, France set up purely commercial trading posts in its early years, and while they weren't as successful, especially in the later years, they would remain there for some time. During the early to mid-18th century, France would change up its game. Instead of using India for purely commercial business, they would begin the process of colonization. By this point, the Mongols had declined to the point where resistance to foreign powers was impossible. Taking advantage of this, France allied themselves with the Mongols and quickly swept up large portions of the Indian subcontinent, taking over as the major player in the region. The British were understandably worried about all this. Having tried this 60 years ago, they knew that the French were in a powerful position, having succeeded. The British East India Company, who at this time regulated a small militia and was supported by the Royal Navy, began rapid military growth to ensure the security of their trading posts. On the other side of the planet, tension was brewing. The Austrians were vengeful for what the Prussians took from them in the War of Austrian Succession. The province of Silesia would be the spark that would ignite the fire. The 7 Years' War had major impacts on Europe, but one of its main takeaways was the effects on Indian control. France, who at this point begun colonizing India for the French Empire, was now under attack by the British and British East India Company. The conflict began in southern India, but spread in the Bengal, where British forces captured Chandigarh. In the same year, under the command of Robert Clive, the British recaptured Calcutta from the French alliance. In the south, France managed to capture Cuddalore, but were then halted at Madras, as their siege proved to be unsuccessful. The Battle of Wandiwash in 1760, British commander Sir Wire Coote decisively defeated the French and overran their territory in the northern Sirkars. The capital of French India, Pondicherry, was the British's next target, which eventually fell to them in the year 1761. This, along with other smaller battles in the region, effectively eliminated the French from India. At the Treaty of Paris, Britain retained control of the northern Sirkars, but returned all of French trading ports on the condition they would not be militarized. Essentially, French power in India had finally come to a close, and with the French Revolution some 40 years later, France would be all but eliminated from the subcontinent completely. With France leaving the subcontinent as a major player, Britain was left alone with just the Dutch. And now, after defeating many of the Indian tribes that were allied with France during the 7 Years' War, the British were able to move in and secure parts of the country for the Company and the British Empire. For the Dutch, their constant wars with the English would eventually catch up with them with the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War of the 1780s, a war that would be disastrous for the Dutch, but a major colonial victory for the British, essentially giving them full control over the Dutch colonies in India. At this point, No European powers were left in a position to halt the British East India Company's conquest of India. Without opposition, the British quickly expanded, setting up puppet governments and establishing rule across the whole subcontinent. The Indian people native to these lands were treated poorly, with priority given to profits rather than people. Growing tension and multiple incidents throughout this period would climax in the mid-1800s, where the British would face their final challenge. The Sepoy Mutiny, also known as the Revolt of 1857 or the India Mutiny, was a large-scale revolt that occurred across India. The rebellion would begin on the 10th of May, 1857 in the town of Meerut. Here, a company of Indian infantrymen, frustrated with the British implementation of ammunition, which would force them to violate their religion, began attacking the British. The rebels would quickly reach the major city of Delhi and begin to mop up the countryside, securing it from the British. The East Indian Company would launch a swift response, dividing their objectives into three parts: Delhi, Kanpur, and Lucknow in the summer, the Lucknow countryside in the winter, and then afterwards, a sweeping campaign to secure victory. The Indians fought hard, but with British reinforcements arriving, they couldn't hold out forever. The conflict came to a close in November of 1858. From this point on, the jewel was now securely attached to the British crown, but the British government was not about to wait for the next crisis to institute change. They blamed the British East Indian Company for fueling the revolt and transferred full control over India to the British crown. Within a year, a new colony had entered the British Empire. That would be the British Raj.